Some Came Running to me is a seminal Frank Sinatra movie. It's a Sinatra that we really hadn't seen before and have never seen since.
And the interplay between Sinatra and Martin is absolutely fabulous.
Some Came Running is one of the great American films. It doesn't have the reputation it deserves yet because it's still a film which is perhaps unsettling in a number of different ways.
You can talk character, you can talk conflict. Minnelli is saying so much, and particularly in terms of visual design. Nobody took it to the level of Minnelli.
Way to think of Some Came Running is in terms of the role of melodrama in the 1950s.
Our image of the 1950s, of the Eisenhower era, is of everything being repressed, that the middle class in small-town America were completely placid.
There's a period of conformism, people stuck in social roles, or at least pressured to have those identities. And what melodrama is about is narrating those pressures.
So you see this in Some Came Running.
This is a movie in 1958 that's already saying people are living under the philosophy that greed really is good, that we don't care who we hurt as long as we're getting something for it.
How could you do this to me? Me. Don't you ever get tired of thinking about your dull, greedy, small self?
Here is a film about this provincial town with their mores and manners, and they're all leading inauthentic lives. There was a lot of things going on, but they tried to hide it. They camouflaged it. That was middle classness.
Some Came Running, it's a novel by James Jones, who wrote From Here to Eternity. James Jones had written this gargantuan novel. I mean, if I had to hold it for more than 2 minutes, I would just keel off this chair. I don't know how anybody actually made a movie out of it. But the director of Some Came Running is not just any director. He's a great director. He's Vincent Minnelli.
Minnelli is known to every film fan as the greatest filmmaker, probably of all time, of musicals. In the 40s and 50s and into the 60s, at MGM with the Arthur Freed unit, he directed some of the most spectacular musicals ever to come out of the studio era.
Vincent Minnelli is theater choreographer who becomes a star director by making Meet Me in St. Louis with his soon-to-be wife, Judy Garland. But Minnelli is attracted to drama as well as musicals. Early in his career, he just kept saying, I don't want to be pigeonholed into this area.
1958 was a major year for him. In the spring of 1958, the musical Gigi came out, for which he won the Academy Award. And then Relevant Debutante came out. And then in late December, Some Came Running was released. So in a single year, we can see the range of Minnelli's style.
Minnelli was at the peak of his powers, but Some Came Running was not paraded as a Vincent Minnelli film. It was paraded as a Frank Sinatra film.
Frank Sinatra, by the mid-1950s, is certainly managing his own career as a Hollywood movie star. He's had his great success with From Here to Eternity. He was willing to play characters who were not quite so popular as a way of expanding his chops as an actor.
There was a 40-pound monkey on my back. The only way to get along with a load like that is to keep leaning on a fix.
Sinatra, just as Minnelli, in his work at MGM, railed against any kind of conformity in their lives and also in their creations on the screen. Sinatra was anti-establishment and Minnelli was anti-establishment. So that made them, very simpatico, although their way of working was very different.
You might say that Sinatra is almost the stereotype of the manly men of the 1950s era, and Minnelli was not at all in that category. He was an extremely sensitive individual, very artistic, very creative.
Also Minnelli, maximum rehearsal. Rehearse. Sinatra didn't like to rehearse a lot because Sinatra felt that you do it the first time, there's a realism, there's a brutality, there's a rawness to it that you can't get in a second take with a third take or fourth take.
Sinatra was a person who saw himself as somewhat iconoclastic, who liked to do things his way.
There's stories that in the 60s when the Rat Pack are filming Ocean's 11, where Sinatra says, if you want a second take, print the first one again.
So Minnelli and Sinatra did not get off to a good start on the film.
They were behind schedule, and Sinatra went and looked at the script and tore 20 pages out of the script. He said, we're not doing this. We're not doing this. And of course, Minnelli acquiesced. You had to. You know, it wasn't a Minnelli picture, it was a Sinatra picture.
There's a very well-known anecdote about them shooting the carnival sequence. Minnelli kept setting up his camera and reframing and reframing. And finally, just when they thought we're about to roll now, Minnelli decided that the Ferris wheel in the background needed to be moved 3 feet. And at that point, Sinatra had gone into his car and drove away.
The producer, Saul C. Siegel, had to come to the set and bring them together again. And then there was, some kind of capitulation.
Minnelli seems to have somewhat adjusted his shooting pattern to accommodate Sinatra. And I think Sinatra probably realized what Minnelli could do. He was probably quite happy to put himself in Minnelli's hands for this picture.
Some Came Running has many of the qualities of an art film. It is trying to say that there's more than the surface to the characters.
Some critics at the time saw it as downbeat and somewhat sordid in its portrayal of the kind of underside of small-town America.
Minnelli was raised in towns like this. He was in the Minnelli Brothers big dramatic company that traveled around these Ohio provincial towns like Parkland and created its own reality. But here, with Some Came Running, he went to the reality that was surrounding him. And he was able to bring up all the things that he saw as a kid that bothered him.
But Minnelli doesn't do what I expected someone would do, making a story about the Midwest. He never condescends to those characters. He never judges them. He never puts them in places where we don't feel their emotions aren't our emotions.
Some Came Running benefits tremendously from the location work that was done. There's extensive shooting in a small town in Indiana to provide the background for all the scenes.
Shirley MacLaine, Dean Martin, Frank Sinatra were out there with some kind of authenticity that they wouldn't have had if it was in Hollywood.
The opening is Sinatra arriving by bus in a town, and there's this idea of the prodigal figure who comes back and has a kind of wisdom about the limits of the world that he left. Sinatra is very good at playing these kind of jaded figures. He's not classically handsome, and I think part of his not classical side is that sense of a kind of world weariness.
After the war, the male comes apart, a fragmentation of the American male that he's never recovered from. And this film talks about this.
Made up your mind what you're going to do now that you're out of the Army?
Sure, never to go in it again.
Through the film, we see a number of different identities for man. The henpecked brother, the jealous lover, Raymond, the carefree playboy, Bama. And the Sinatra character, Dave Hirsch, has some of a little bit of all of those.
One of the basic conflictual strategies of family melodrama is the home. So what David does in this, he rejects the real home and finds an ideal home. And that home is Smithy's bar. It's hotel rooms that are full of people. And so we have this conflict, reality versus the ideal.
In the 1950s, I mean, this is only 5 years after Playboy magazine, one of the roles that's being held out to the American male is to be the carefree man who thinks of women as nothing but objects. On the other hand, the 50s is also saying men have to develop sensitivity about the needs of others. There's a kind of potentially progressive image of masculinity in the film.
How many drinks you had, Dave?
A few.
Well, the only time you talk nice to me is when you're loaded.
Let's get loaded.
This was not Shirley MacLaine's first film, but this is an amazing breakout role for her.
She plays the character somewhat fearless and not afraid to be embarrassing in front of the camera. She takes a lot of the sort of cute Cupid doll type role she'd been playing up to that point and harnesses it to a much more complex character.
There's a scene in that movie that should be put in a time capsule. Shirley MacLaine is sitting at Sinatra's feet reading a story that he's written.
You don't understand a word of what I said. You don't understand the story at all.
No, I don't, but that don't mean I don't like it. I don't understand you neither, but that don't mean I don't like you. I love you, but I don't understand you. So what's the matter with that?
the whole sense of their relationship turns on the dime of that one particular scene. It's eyes, it's a gesture, it's a movement. Shirley MacLaine calls this her favorite performance still, because I think she felt that connection.
I don't know what it is about them pigs, but they always look better at night.
In some ways, we see the beginnings of the Rat Pack in this picture because co-starring with Frank Sinatra here is Dean Martin in one of his greatest performances. Dean Martin, he's in all the Martin Lewis films where he's kind of the foil to the wacky Jerry Lewis, but this is certainly the first serious dramatic role. He does an amazing portrait of a person who's drinking and drinking too much.
Dean Martin is utterly charming in this movie, and yet the language that he's using in the movie, his absolute contempt for women, that he's calling pigs all the time. He's hating Shirley MacLaine's character.
I got nothing against Ginny, nothing at all. But even she knows she's a pig.
It's a very disturbing scene because we're forced to re-examine who this man is. This man is so entertaining, so likable, can use this kind of language towards this woman. That gesture is typical of Minnelli in a way. I think he's fascinated with contradictory characters.
So you get scenes that play out the dynamics between those people, between Sinatra and Dean Martin, between Sinatra and Shirley MacLaine, or between the three of them, and there's that improvisation, spontaneity of the way the actors play off of each other.
It was Minnelli's idea to cast Dean Martin in the film as Bama. He knew that Martin and Sinatra were friends in real life, and that this off-screen chemistry would most likely translate into on-screen chemistry.
Do you play any cards, Mr. Hirsch?
Some, why?
Well, just a few of the boys and myself, we have a little old poker game now and then. We'd kind of like to have a little new blood.
And new money.
It's the first scene in film history where Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra are doing a scene together.
In reality, we know they're already buddies, and you can see that kind of simultaneous pretending not to have known each other, but also this wisdom that we already know each other, we're in on the joke.
Minnelli's mise-en-scène in this sequence is, to a large extent, geared towards allowing Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra to really do their stuff.
There's this sense of, let's just let the camera roll and have the buddies do their shtick on camera.
Minnelli never underlines any effects here, never cut into a close-up. In a sense, we are permitted to discover what's wonderful about these two performers without a great deal of interference.
Some Came Running is a relatively early cinemascope or widescreen picture for Hollywood, and Minnelli became one of the grand masters of the cinemascope frame.
He is interested in the way characters inhabit a space and the way they search for meanings within those spaces.
Minnelli's visual structuring comes down to long take composition and depth. In other words, foreground, medium, background, all in focus, and if you want to change space or values, you move the actor around, the lighting around, props around, but you stay within the shot. Minnelli works within the shot. He comes from theater.
But Minnelli is going to say, I can see something in this that won't make it look like a stagey version. I'm going to make something more of it.
A good example is the scene when Dave and Gwen first kiss, where they're standing against a window in the cottage at her dad's house, and at first it's brightly lit, but then it becomes just two silhouettes.
And then he will close down all the color. He will close down the musical score. So now we're presented not with excess, but omission.
One of the things that's remarkable about the film is how, for much of its running time, how restrained it is.
Minnelli said he had to temper his enthusiasm while making the film. Maybe what he meant by that was that for the small-town middle-class scenes, he had to kind of control his more flamboyant impulses.
But he's holding back deliberately because he knows what he's ending this film with, which is the carnival sequence.
I got one of them grammar books from the library. I got it from that teacher whom is the objective.
The carnival scene in Some Came Running is often talked about as one of the great set pieces in 50s American cinema.
We can only imagine today how that sequence at the end must have looked huge on the big screen in CinemaScope. Figures running here and there, chaos ensuing.
Talk about excess. The first shot, it's this tomato red background and the killer in silhouette, black against tomato red. Wow!
It's about as wild a shot as you can imagine. Minnelli said that he used the inside of a jukebox as his visual model for the final sequence with its flashing colored lights.
And of course, a jukebox was noisy. It was perfect for a carnival. But the point of the jukebox is it's garish, and he wanted the carnival to be garish.
Minnelli, from a formal perspective, really cuts loose here, and all the color that he'd been holding back throughout the course of the film bursts forth.
The carnival sequence is composed and edited in a completely different way from the rest of the film. It's cut, 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 cut. Short shots, one after another. Montage is the way that Minnelli is visually structuring the carnival.
Also, the camera movement becomes quite frenzied, and lots of crisscrossing, complicated action, all kinds of strange, sort of angular ways.
And in particular, the famous low-angle shots we see of the killer and also of Dean Martin, where in the background we see whirling and spinning above them from some sort of amusement park ride.
Everything's spectacular, everything is explosive. It's almost as if you go into another emotional register by going into another visual register.
But it's also interesting for other reasons. I mean, the style in that sequence is not at all arbitrary.
The carnival scene that really shows that visually the breakdown of this placid surface in the town.
The carnival brings the private into the public, take people out of the home, put them in the public square. And it's not just any carnival. Remember, it's the centenary celebration of the town's history. So on the one hand, we have a city applauding itself on the back. Underneath, you have lies, deceit, affairs, jealousy, passions out of control, and urban violence.
Minnelli saw the world around him that was so hypocritical and conformist, like Parkman, so this was a way to sting it, to show it for what it was.
If you go back and look at the New York Times reviews or anything of that period, they'll say, this is crazy. The guy's got a gun on him and people are gonna die and he's got Ferris wheels and a carnival atmosphere. It looks like a musical. Today, that's looked at as pure genius, that Minnelli would make a carnival atmosphere for what would happen to them because the emotions play in so well.
In the original script, Dave was supposed to take the bullet and die, but Sinatra read this and felt that, in fact, Jenny should take the bullet, protecting him instead of him dying. McClane says, basically, he threw the film to me by letting me die at the end. And it's far more moving and far more interesting, in a way, to have her die.
The idea is the men grow by realizing what they missed by the woman who was taken away from them. That becomes even more extreme with Bama, who has his moment of reconciliation with Ginny at her funeral.
Dean Martin's character does take off his hat. And Minnelli is saying with a gesture, with the way people walk, with the way they look at each other, that this is wrong and that we're heading down a path we shouldn't be heading down.
The camera, in the very last moments, moves from all the people to the river behind them. It's almost as if to say, whatever the foibles, whatever the ups and downs of humans, life goes on.
And though they walk off with almost a blank stare past the camera in the final scene of the film, there's a hope that they will go upward and not descend back into the madness and the chaos that they've just left.
Minnelli is often criticized as being style over substance, but in Some Came Running, the style fit the substance of that movie.
Some Came Running is a dark film, Some Came Running is a sad film. It's a big film, there's a lot of money on the screen, but it's not an uplifting, buoyant, cheerful epic of the sort that Hollywood had been making.
Minnelli really shows us an entire town's portrait in the course of this film, then going a little beneath it to show us the roiling tensions and passions that lay beneath. And he draws out of Sinatra one of his greatest performances.
The one time I ever got to sit down and talk to Frank Sinatra and tried to get him to talk about his work seriously. He asked me what my favorite performance of his was. And I said, well, I had just seen again Manchurian Candidate. And he said, no, look at Some Came Running again. He said, look at it. When I look at it, I don't hate myself. I look at it and I see something in me that I couldn't do on cue. He said there became times when I would do movies where I knew I could just be myself. And he said in this movie, Vincent Minnelli wasn't satisfied with me being that. So when I look at it, I see somebody that's not me up on the screen. I don't see any of my tricks up there. So Some Came Running is a movie that, to me, plays better right now than it ever did in 1958. Sinatra putting up his most vulnerable screen performance ever.